So for our first ever MARINElife webinar, I'd love to welcome Beccy MacDonald-Lofts, who's going to talk to us about seahorses of the UK, particularly their ecology and conservation. So Beccy, over to you.
Thank you ever so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate the sun is shining in some places, so really pleased that you could join me. So basically, yes, going to be talking to you about Seahorse of the UK, but also a little about the research that's going on across the UK at the moment. So a little bit about me, just so you know who on earth I am and why I'm talking to you today. So that's me, and that's a little spiny seahorse. So I've been very lucky in my life that I've managed to do an awful lot with marine biology that I was hoping to. And I'm now a freelance marine consultant, but I also work part-time with local government. So I get to work with coastal communities, but also in the marine sector as well. And I'm really pleased at that. So basically, I'm trained in marine biology and coastal management, but also surveying and really intertidal zone and surveying any species that you can is what I love to do best. So I used to be a trustee with the Seahorse Trust. I still work with them very, very closely regarding their course, which I'll talk to you about later. And I firstly must say thank you very much to Seahorse Trust today for allowing me to use a lot of their videos and images. So that's all been provided by them. So without further ado, I will carry on and you can have a look at this. So seahorses have this sort of enigmatic, sort of magical way about them. People love them. They're really strange. They are very, very odd with their curved tail. In fact, they're not covered in scales. They actually have skin and they just capture people's imagination. We do have them in the UK. We found out through a series of dives that they actually live here and reside here because originally people thought that they came here just to find food and then they went back down into Europe and to warmer waters. But because of divers and the research that they've done and watching them, they realised that actually they are breeding here. So we've done quite a lot of research in the background around where these species are, and we're really thankful to everybody who gets involved and reports their sightings of seahorses in the UK. So they can do that through the Seahorse Trust website. And you don't have to just do it for the UK, you can do it whenever you're abroad as well, and I'll show you a bit more about that later. So from the data that we've had that's come through from the sightings, we know that short-snouted seahorses have been sighted all the way around the UK. So all the blue marks on there that you can see are the areas that we have records for short-snouted seahorses. So these lovely little creatures have a short snout, hence their name. So they're quite a stocky seahorse with a little short snout, quite a rounded little belly. And we know that their life cycle, the strange things with seahorses is the males get pregnant. I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. But that pregnancy lasts around 21 days, and then they have between 250 and 500 fry, which are their babies. So they partner over a season. We know that again because of the research that we've done. And whereas some seahorses have a different sort of partnering situation. And again, I'll talk about that a bit more. So these are our little short-snouteds. They have quite a sharp coronet on the top of their head, which is a bit like a crown. And they look very different to the other species that we found in the UK, which are the spiny seahorse, which is also known as a long-snouted seahorse. But you can see why it's called the spiny. It has these wonderful spines that come off its body, and that is because of the camouflage that it uses. So the short-snouteds that we just saw, they tend to prefer rockier areas, whereas the spiny seahorse tends to prefer those areas with lots of weed, particularly seagrass. But they can interchange in their areas. So they are not strictly one habitat and the other, they do cross over. So spinies, again, have this distribution shown in red that we know from the sightings that we've had. They've got a slightly longer, what we call gestation period, the pregnancy of 28 days, and they have a lot more babies, between 500 to 700. The one you can see there in the photo, that's a male, a heavily pregnant male. You can tell that by his lovely rounded belly. And the one before we have here a male that's quite rounded and pregnant, but the one you can see with a little pointed bit coming out, that's actually the female, and that's called an ovipositor, and that's where she transfers her eggs out into the male's body. So I said a moment ago about that we don't just collect data for the UK, we also collect it worldwide. And I have noted that one of our amazing surveyors from Malta is actually on the call. So when you go to the Seahorse Trust website, you can find this map and you can zoom in and out different countries and find out where there's sightings. I would click on it, but I feel it's probably not going to work. So you can go in and have a look. You can submit your sightings of where you've seen them, preferably with an image, so we can actually see where they are. Now, talking of images, just so that I've mentioned this, the Seahorse Trust and the MMO, who provide the licenses for the UK, do not advocate for the use of flash. And if you were to use flash photography, you do have to get a separate license from the MMO. The reason the Seahorse Trust don't advocate for it is that they have noticed quite a change in behaviour to the detriment of seahorses when flash photography is used. And if you talk to people who work in aquaria, you'll notice that all around the seahorse enclosures, there are signs saying no flash photography. And that is because they have realised that if there is an instance where there's a lot of flash photography used, the individuals become unwell quite quickly over a period of weeks and then sadly die. This doesn't always happen, but we always go on the precautionary principle, which is why the Seahorse Trust don't really advocate for the use of flash. So just to give you a bit more about the sort of ecology of seahorses, here are some different species. So you can see the appendages there on the body, and they've got these wonderful appendages that come out. They are made with skin. They can change, they can retract in, or they can be longer. It's all to do with camouflage and changing to the environment and the habitat that they are in. You'll see there in the bottom left, there's one that looks pretty shabby. It's also covered in sediment. This hasn't impacted its life. It's just the way it's using itself to really camouflage in the background. They can also blend in by changing their color. So you can see the reddish colored seahorse there. It has blended in more with the type of seaweed that's next to it in order to have that red coloration. So we do see that quite heavily here in the UK, and it does mean that seahorses are really difficult to spot. You're really lucky if you do manage to see one. So seahorses don't just use colour to sort of change to their environment, but they also use it to talk to each other. So here we have two different images. So on the left, we actually have two seahorses. You can see there on the left one that you have this bright white coloration of the seahorse with a black outline around it. That black outline and those black spots are there to attract their mate. Say, look at me, aren't I gorgeous? Come and dance with me. Come and have that sort of bonding dance so that we can pair together. And they will quite regularly have these dawn dances together. And it's that changing colour to talk to each other, to express emotion, if you like, in that way, to sort of say, let's mate or let's not mate, or that reaffirms their bond together. In the image on the right, it just looks like we've got lots of different sort of bits of weed on the ground, but actually there are two seahorses hiding in there. So, they have these two different ways of using colour change. Their eyes are incredibly sensitive, which is again a reason why the Seahorse Trust has never sort of promoted that use of flash photography. And there is research at the moment going on to really look at how incredible their eyes are and how the photoreceptors actually receive that light. That research hasn't been published yet, but it is ongoing at the moment. So those eyes are incredibly mobile. They've got almost 360-degree vision. So if you ever did come across seahorses in the water and you think they haven't seen you, they've seen you. They really know what's going on around them. They've got excellent eyesight, so they can see in all sort of light levels in order to find their food. So they feed off tiny, tiny little shrimp. So they need to be able to see those shrimp. And because of that, they have this incredible eyesight. The other amazing thing with the seahorses is the prehensile tail. It is like a snake, but it's not curling backwards, as sometimes you see like an S shape drawn for seahorses. That isn't quite accurate. So here on the left, we've got a heavily pregnant male there with his tail wrapped around seagrass, and another pregnant male on the other side. And you can see how well that wraps around. The male seahorses really need to stay as secure as possible in order to keep an area. And research, especially that done around Studland Bay area, has shown these territories for males and females, with the males having a smaller territory than the females do. The females will move around quite a lot more. But the males, as you can imagine, they need to reserve that energy for their young. So they tend to have a much smaller area that they'll move around in order to find food. So these tails are incredible. So I've got a little video to show you of one waving around in the current. So hopefully this is going to work. It did a minute ago. So are you going to work? There we go. So there you could see the seahorse moving around, being really tightly grasped onto the seagrass without any issues at all at holding on. We do sometimes sadly find seahorses washed up after big storms, but we've noted from sort of research that's been done in different locations around the UK that seahorses will actually migrate during the winter months and go into deeper water so that they stay out of that stormy, shallow coastal water to try and protect themselves. So here we go, super dads. Here we got a lovely dad. He was an incredible individual. He's about 3-4 years old in this image. And you can see the dark color of the pouch there. That's because of all the fry that are inside there. And they were actually born a couple of days later after this photo was taken. The two little tiny fry, you can see the photo, that's from a tank situation. But you can see they are really, really tiny. And the reason why seahorses release so many fry is in order that one, maybe two might survive. So it is quite a difficult world out there. Once you are born, you go up into the plankton in the water column. You could get eaten by a fish, but hopefully that large number of individuals that are released, one or two may survive. If that sort of whetted your appetite to find out more about seahorses, the Seahorse Trust do have an online course. It's called the Seahorse Biology, Ecology and Conservation course. So it has 3 different sections to it covering those different elements. The course is normally £65, but for everybody on the call today, if you use the code MARINELIFE and send that through to Neil at the Seahorse Trust, you will be able to receive the course at a discounted rate of £50. So I think some information will be going in the chat about that later. We also have a survey course, which involves undertaking this online course and then topping it up with a webinar. Surveying in the UK is strictly under license. So we do explain all of that in that course. Those licenses are by the MMO. So just to make everyone aware on the call that to seek a seahorse in the UK, well, specifically England, the rules are very, very tight. You can't seek a seahorse without a license. So just to sort of make that clear so everyone knows that situation. So with the Seahorse Trust and with quite a few other researchers out there, they all hold MMO licenses with specific agents on who are able to take people out and support seahorse research through volunteer work. So if you're interested, obviously do reach out to the Seahorse Trust, or you may hear about other projects that are happening across the world. Specifically, we know that there's a really good one in Malta. So most of the research in the UK really has focused around Studland Bay, and I think it's really important to note that those maps we saw earlier, where there might be sightings all around the UK, there's a big bias in sightings to the south of England, mainly because that's where the majority of shore diving happens because of the water temperature and things like that. So there is a bias towards sort of survey efforts. So really, we encourage people, if you do see them elsewhere, please, do let us know. But also as a diver myself, I've got to say one of my favourite places to dive is up in Berwick. It's really chilly, but it's lovely. So, you know, don't be frightened to learn to dive or snorkel in the UK. It is an incredible marine world out there, not just seahorses, but all of it. It is really fantastic. So Studland Bay is quite an interesting place. As you can see in the images there, there's a lot of boats, a lot of boat traffic, a lot of visitors love to come to Studland Bay. It's home to both native species, so both the short-snouted and the long-snouted, the spiny seahorse, are seen there. And the Seahorse Trust has been researching for spiny seahorse down at Studland for a very long time now. Now, I first became interested in seahorses as a child, and then as I became an adult and actually moved to the South Coast, I then reached out to the Seahorse Trust, and I started originally as a survey diver with them about 15 years ago, and obviously did the education stuff now. So there are these opportunities out there. So it's the primary site for spiny seahorse. It has been designated now as a marine conservation zone with management measures that are being put in place. It says they're under consideration, but a lot of them have been put in place by now. But it is what we call a honeypot site, and this does cause a bit of an issue in that you can have over 350 boats there a day. That causes problems for survey divers. As you can imagine, that boat traffic doesn't make it the most pleasant place to dive, especially when water drops down to around 1 metre. So, you know, there are issues. There's also issues for the seagrass bed there as well. But lots of work has happened, and we're really delighted with how things have changed at that site. So just to give you an idea of what it's like with the boats. So here's some boats on the surface. This is on a relatively quiet day, and then you'll see who's hiding underneath. And I'd be quite interested to know how many people can spot the number of seahorses in this image, because there's you really have to look quite closely. Okay, so in that image, you can clearly see the one seahorse down the bottom, but there is actually another one on the other side. So it's a pair together. So you can see how sort of close that is. It's not deep at all for where you'll find the seahorses. And I have had an instance where I was going in to do a survey dive, and I put my mask on, stuck my head under the water, and just between my legs was a piece of weed. And on that weed was a seahorse, but there was nothing, it was completely bare patch all the way around. So you really have to be very, very careful there. This year, I'm really pleased to say that we've seen quite a lot of seahorses at Studland. So there were 48 seahorses sighted there this year. So 48 spiny seahorses were seen and 1 short-snouted just by the survey dives. So that gives you a flavour that numbers have gone up. We did have a year where we had no seahorse sighted at all, which was really quite a devastating year. So from the research that's been done at Studland, we found out that information about territories, about the sizes of that species in that location. And I must point that out because it's really important that we don't just treat research to meaning every single species behaves in the same way, or that they, you know, what suits one species doesn't suit another. So we've also looked at their mating strategies, and because of the divers in the water, for the first time a couple of years ago, we actually managed to get video footage of 2 males and a female together, and we've never seen that before. So we don't know if they were just starting to pair up, or if actually that female had 2 males. We don't know. So it's really quite interesting. We've also started to look at things like habitat preferences. And there has actually been further research done by CFAS looking at modelling the information we did have on the distribution of seahorses versus the environmental data that's been done. So has been quite a lot of modelling done with that, and Seahorse Trust, CFAS, and sort of naturally involved in that as well, and that was really good. We've also managed to see how population sizes change in the areas that we've looked at. At the moment, we originally just had the one site, but we now have sites for short-snouted and spiny, and the Seahorse Trust have got around 8 sites that are being actively surveyed all through the summer season. So that's generally from March through to October, but it depends on the sort of conditions. We've also been able to have a look at pressures and threats here in the UK. So we know what there is, but we also know about a lot of pressures and threats all the way around the world. Now, the other, you can see in the photos there that we have a couple of spiny seahorses. Now, what we have managed to realise is that they have individual markings on their skin. So if you look, there are little white dots all the way around their face, sort of both sides. And we can now use those profile shots to identify each individual seahorse, which is now allowing us to really think about how their life history changes, whether we see them from one year to the next, who they pair up with, all those sorts of elements. So because of that, we've realised that actually there's seasonal pairing for the spiny seahorses at Studland. So they'll find a mate at the beginning of the season, and they will be true to that mate for the whole season. From the research we have so far, that could change, but that's what we know at the moment. Whereas the hedgehog seahorse that you can see in there, actually we found with hedgehog seahorses that they like to attach themselves to spiny urchins and move themselves around a lot, and they'll change mates constantly. They're not sticking with one seasonally or in any way monogamous. They change from one to the other. So there are lots of seahorse species out there. So if you are interested in them, there is a book by Sarah Lowry, and I'll stick the information to Kieran later so we can stick that into the chat. So just to put that point out about licensing, obviously, those of us that are doing survey work, we are under license. But if you do happen to see a seahorse anywhere in the world, please do fill out the seahorse survey online. So this form has changed a lot, but it's just to give you a flavour of the information asked. So who you are, how we can, the Seahorse Trust can contact you. But if you have an image tells us so much. It can tell us the species, whether it's male or female, what the habitat is like, all these different characteristics, whether the individual may be well or not well, all those sorts of things. So, I mean, in just that image, you can see there is actually a little anemone in there. You can see the seagrass, you can see the sediment, all those different elements. So, you know, we are very keen to encourage people to report what they see. It would be great. Now, earlier I mentioned about the issues around flash photography, but any photography and any disturbance could be an issue to seahorses. They're very good at getting stressed very quickly. And like us, if you get stressed because of a series of things, it can lead you to become quite unwell. We know from blood work that was done on seahorses that they do carry diseases like TB and Vibro. So if they happen to be suffering with quite a lot of different environmental stresses, this unfortunately can lead to the loss of that seahorse. So the next image, we're going to put a poll up. I'd just be really interested to know from your initial look, which seahorse you think is a happy seahorse. That's one that's not stressed, not concerned about the presence of the surveyor, versus one that is stressed. So I'm going to put that up now. So hopefully we can put up the poll. Cool. So have a go. Is it A or is it B?
You might need to move the pop-up around so that you can see both pictures. I know for me it's come up right in front of B, so you should be able to move that. I think I know which one it is. I'm not going to say out loud, but
I remember.
I've got my guess in my head because I can't actually submit a response as the host. Right, I think we've got over 100 responses.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it. So 91% reckon that A is stressed and 9% reckon that B is stressed.
Okay, thank you. So it's actually A. So on the licensing that you actually get from the MMO, there is a condition form at the back of it, which you sign up to when you agree to take that license on. In that, it explains the characteristics of stress in a seahorse. So showing you this image obviously shows you what it looks like, but at the same time, there can be different things that cause this to happen. So what we see in a seahorse, once it is stressed or it's becoming stressed or it already is stressed, is this initial darkening of the skin. So you can see in A how much darker that individual is to the one in B. The head then starts to tuck into the body, so trying to make themselves look smaller. Then slowly they will lower themselves and eventually they'll actually flatten themselves onto the seabed. All of this obviously is in those conditions. So to look out for these signs of the head tucking, the darkening, and then the flattening. When that's seen, survey divers that we work with all move away. If there's any signs at all, they go. We also will never follow seahorses that are showing those signs. We wouldn't follow them anyway. If they get up and swim away, they get up and swim away. They're off. Whereas the one B, you can see the head is up. They're sort of looking around, very light-bodied. There's no curling there. Now, one of the immediate differences between those two seahorses is that A is heavily pregnant. B is a juvenile male. So it's not pregnant, isn't courting. There's none of those additional stresses going on. So there's different reasons why things change. But just really wanted to make that aware that if you do see those reactions and you do happen to come across a seahorse, please back away gently. Just, leave it alone. So one of the things I wanted to sort of quickly talk to you about is some of the things that we've seen in the environment at Studland. So this is a lovely, healthy seagrass bed. And I must say, there's some incredible work going on in the UK to restore our seagrass beds all across the UK, particularly in Wales and Scotland. There's some incredible work going on, and I know they often look for volunteers. So if that's of interest to you, please do look. So what we've seen is things like anchor damage and chain drag, what happens before, what happens after, and this really does make quite a difference to the environment. So I'll just show you a little video of what that actually looks like when you're under the water and you see it happening. So you can see there how that chain is dragging backwards and forwards. That's obviously in a very low current. So that area is in seagrass. So obviously that constant movement backwards and forwards does unfortunately disturb the seagrass, which actually grows as a rhizome, a bit like strawberries. So it can move those plants, it can cause that damage, and it's always been, a bit of an issue, and there's lots of work being done between different organisations to see how to resolve it. But when you actually look down from space, this is what you can see. So that was, would have all been seagrass. There would have been natural open patches. There always is, where you can see those scour marks there from the mooring chains. So then something needed to be done. Change had to happen from both sides. They all knew that something needed to go. So there's different ways of doing this. So the traditional mooring is to have a buoy on the top, chain to the bottom, which is generally attached to something like a concrete block. So things were done in terms of using helical screws or anchors, or still keeping the blocks, but placing buoys along that chain, or it could be a bungee rope to lift up that chain off the seabed so that there doesn't get that scour effect. Now, a few years ago, the Seahorse Trust got into a collaboration with boat folk, and boat folk provided a whole series of these mooring buoys with the idea of changing all their traditional moorings to eco moorings. So boat folk own quite a few harbours around the UK, and these eco moorings that were sturdy at first were put in at Studland to see if they would be successful. Would people use them? Would they not use them? So they were put in, and they were done using this helical screw attachment, elastic node on it, and then aligned to the mooring buoy with an explanation about what it was for. So we're really pleased that so many people were using those eco moorings. So many were using them that actually there's even more eco moorings out there. There's been work done with the Studland Bay partnership to put even more eco moorings in, and they're really well used by those who visit by sea. So we're really pleased, they're excellent. And there's also some research going on about how impactful these have actually been on the seabed. Are they doing what we wanted them to do? Are they impacting the population of seahorses? So it's all coming together really nicely. So other work that's going on in terms of research is using biohuts. So these are really successful in other countries. So the idea is that you create these Gambian style structures. These ones originally were put underneath one of the harbours to see how life would come round to them, but they've also been modified and they're now going to be put by 2 different research projects on the seabed to see how they are used by different species, and that could include seahorses. Now, I did mention earlier about this sort of work that's been happening around where seahorses are found in the UK. We do have a lot of marine conservation zones which now nominate seahorses as a species that needs to be protected there. But also there's a lot of excitement around something called eDNA. And that idea is that you can sample the water column and you can find out what species are there. It works really well with fish with scales. Doesn't seem to work that well with seahorses because they don't have scales, they have skin, but they are now looking at researching that into the sediment. See, does the sediment hold some of that eDNA? And there has been some found to say a seahorse was here, but that's really early stages. Don't know yet if that's going to be actually something that can be used to say where seahorses are or aren't, because we don't know how long ago that seahorse was there, all those sorts of things. So there's lots of research going on by different organisations. So obviously Seahorse Trust, University of Portsmouth, Natural England, and other universities are busy doing this. Now, a while ago, I spoke about how we look at seahorses and how they're treated around the world. And then unfortunately, we do have a situation where seahorses are considered to be part of the traditional medicine trade and also sold as curios. Now, I wanted to put this in as our last slide to just highlight this as an issue. And if you do see them for sale in UK stores, please contact the Seahorse Trust. They have a specific team who deal with it. Last week they held talks with eBay, who are now putting in lots of algorithms to make sure you can't buy these things online. These ones, unfortunately, are actually from the UK. They were being sold at a curio shop on the south coast. When the police raided the shop, they found all of this, plus a lot more, plus other species that are protected and shouldn't be there, including turtles and sharks, all sorts. So please just be aware that you shouldn't be able to buy these from anywhere, really. So that's me. I've talked enough, so I'm going to stop. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I think it's time for a Q&A.